Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 178 and it's titled Oops All Companions. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card is Jegantha the Wellspring. And Jegantha is 4 and a hybrid green-red for a 5/5 legendary creature elemental elk. It has Companion, so no card in your starting deck has more than one of the same mana symbol in its mana cost. Then it could be our companion, but it's not going to be our companion. And then it can also tap to add 1 mana of each color, but this mana can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. So this is a bit of a unique card to get because if you don't know the unspoken rule of the channel, any random card that can be a commander has to be the commander of the deck. So in this case, of course, the commander is going to be Jegantha the Wellspring. Now, with that being said, there are a ton of different things that you can do with Jegantha because it is kind of just a generic 5-color commander. It doesn't lean in any particular way. Yes, it's an elemental, so we could make an elemental deck. It's an elk, so we could make an elk deck. It specifically cares about having non-generic mana costs, but there's a couple of other unique things about this card that I wanted to specifically get into, and I'll give you a bit of a hint as to what that may be if the title of the video wasn't enough, but we have more than just Jegantha in our command zone, because not only is Jegantha our commander, we also have a companion in Umori the Collector. And Umori the Collector is 2 and then a hybrid Golgari, so a black-green and black-green, for a 4/5 legendary creature ooze. As Umori enters the battlefield, choose a card type. Spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast, and Umori actually does matter when it comes to its companion text, so each non-land card in your starting deck shares a card type. Now, one of the unique parts of Commander is that does in fact also include our commander, and since Jegantha is only a creature, that is its only card type, Umori has to say creature when it enters the battlefield, and for it to be a legal companion, every single non-land card in our deck has to be a creature, which it is. So we are playing full creatures, and instead of it being Oops All Creatures, you might notice that the deck title was Oops All Companions, and that is incredibly specific, well, because we've talked about Jegantha. Jegantha's a companion. We've talked about Umori. Umori's a companion. So, as you may be able to guess, moving into our themes of this deck, we are playing all companions. And I hear you kind of asking, but Zach, there's only 10 legal Magic the Gathering companions. How do you build an entire deck around that? So, obviously, the short answer is, well, we can't. But to explain a little bit more, our first theme is those 10 Magic the Gathering companions, although since we're in Commander and Lutri is banned, that's only 9 companions. But that means we're playing cards like Kahira the Orphan Guard, which is 1 and then a green-white, green-white, for a 3/2 legendary creature cat beast. Its companion requirement is that each creature card in your starting deck is a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast. It has vigilance, and each other creature you control, that's a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast, gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you up front, that is almost entirely a useless ability. We do not have a ton of cats, elementals, nightmares, dinosaurs, or beasts. I know that we do have Jegantha, we've talked about Umori, we do have the other companions from Ikoria. Those do technically all fall under that, or at least most of them do. I'm not 100% sure if they all do, but either way, the idea here is that we have all of the companions from Magic the Gathering. And there are a couple of cards that have companion in the name that I felt fit the bill enough that they are also in here, but there's not enough of them to really talk about. Now, with that being said, we still do not have a complete deck. So we had to look at other companions inside Magic, and that led us to Doctor Who. because you might remember that a lot of the cards in the Doctor Who set had an ability called Doctor's Companion, where you can have them as a commander if the other commander is the Doctor. So an example of this is Donna Noble, who is 3 and a red for a 2/4 legendary creature, human. She has Soul Bond, and whenever she or a creature that she's paired with is dealt damage, Donna deals that much damage to target opponent. But for us, actually the most important part of this card is that it says Doctor's Companion. So not only are we playing the companions from Magic the Gathering, we are playing the companions from Doctor Who. And so that lets us fill up the deck with a lot more cards. Although, if we're being perfectly honest, that still means we don't have a complete deck. There still aren't enough cards for us to fill out a 100 card commander deck. So we need to find a third set of companions, and luckily, there is another Universes Beyond set that provides us with companions, even though those companions don't technically say the word companion on them, and those are the ones from Fallout. Now, obviously, this is a little bit of a stretch, so bear with me. If you've never played a Fallout game, you can recruit some characters in the games to be your companions. So while the cards themselves do not say the word companion on them, they are by definition of being in the Fallout universe companions to the player character, like Raoul Troubleshooter, which is 1 a blue and a black, also voiced by Machete, just in case you need a fun fact, is a 1/4 zombie mutant rogue. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from among cards in your graveyard that were milled this turn, and tap. Each player mills a card. Now, like I said, there are no mentions of the fact that Raoul is a companion, so you kind of just have to trust me on this one that he is if you've never played the Fallout games, but we've included some of the companions pretty much from every game that I was possibly able to include them. So that includes New Vegas, I think there might be 1 or 2 from 3, there's Fallout 4, and then of course there is some from Fallout 76. I believe there's actually only 1 from Fallout 76. But either way, we have at that point enough cards to make an entire commander deck if we're using the companions from Magic, the companions from Doctor Who, and the companions from Fallout, meaning we can quite literally make an Oops All Companions deck that is also all creature based because we do have Umori in the companion zone, and that is our deck. Now, with that being said, and as we move forward into our key cards, it is worth mentioning that it is kind of difficult to tie a lot of these cards together. There aren't a ton of synergies that overlap with a lot of the cards because a lot of them were designed to either be commanders of their own decks or to play in very specific archetypes, and so shoving them all together does make things a little bit complicated. With that being said, though, we do have a couple of cards that really just shine in this deck. The first of which is Sarah Jane Smith. So, one of our Doctor Who companions. She is 1 and a white for a 2/1 legendary creature human detective. Whenever you cast a historic spell, Investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn, and then of course the all-important Doctor's Companion text. Now, because we are only playing companions, and because of the way that companions function in Magic, whether it's the ones that were printed in Ikoria, Doctor Who, or Fallout, every single one of them is a legendary creature, meaning that every single one of them is historic. So being able to make a clue every single time we cast a spell, or at least once per turn, means that we can just generate a ton of card advantage as the game goes on, and eventually put us in a position to win, while even though we don't have a ton of super efficient synergies, there are quite a few Doctor Who companions that do care about historic spells, so we can play into that pretty heavily with this deck, and Sarah Jane Smith is one of the best card advantage engines. Moving on to our next key card, we have a Fallout companion in McCready Lamplight Mayor, and I know for those of you who know a little bit about Fallout, this does look like a strange companion because it is a child, but this is the McCready from Fallout 3. He becomes a companion in Fallout 4 when he is an adult, so don't worry, this is not putting a child in danger. But anyway, he is a white and a black for a legendary creature human advisor. He's a 1/3. Whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, it gains Skulk until the end of turn. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater attacks you, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Now, this is important to our deck for a couple of different reasons. The first being that it's a protection piece. It's able to protect us from getting attacked by giant creatures because our opponents typically aren't going to want to take that life loss. And it also makes the actual combat math very difficult when we are gaining life. Our opponents are losing life, so they don't quite know how many creatures they might need to attack us with. But the other reason that it's very important is it cares about creatures with power 2 or less. As weird as it may seem, there are a lot of companions that have power 2 or less. And yes, there are some that do have more, but being able to give Skulk to most of our creatures means that we can kind of sneak them in, which is very important for our creatures that have combat damage triggers, but it's also a great way to make sure that we can sneak through the damage that we need to close out the game, because we're not going to be dishing out a ton of it. We're going to have to kind of pick and choose our moments to take advantage of the swing of the game, and McCready gives us a lot more options than he might otherwise. Anyway, moving into our final key card, this one is another historic piece, and that is Tegan Jegantha. So Tegan is 2 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature, human. She has a brave heart, so whenever you attack, target attacking historic creature gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until the end of turn. And of course, Doctor's Companion. So because Tegan specifically says whenever you attack, so not when she attacks, target attacking historic creature gets indestructible, since once again, all of our creatures are historic creatures, every single time we attack with Tegan on board, she's giving an attacking creature indestructible. So if we are attacking with just one creature, maybe something that has Skulk because of McCready, we can get in that damage without worrying about our creature dying because we know it's going to have indestructible. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to the entire team. We can't just swing out and give them all indestructible as it's only one creature. But this is important because, like I said, we have a ton of smaller creatures or creatures that at least care about getting through damage. And Tegan's going to give us a way to do that without worrying about them dying. So anyway, those are all of our key cards for this week, and the next thing we got to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck, and these are cards that kind of create their own value engines or are very powerful pieces, and in some cases are just fun cards that I want to highlight. So the first pair of cards that I want to talk about is going to be Lurrus of the Dream Den and Adric Mathematical Genius. So Lurrus is 1 and a white-black for a 3/2 Cat Nightmare. Its companion requirement is that each permanent card in your starting deck has converted mana cost 2 or less. Obviously, it is not our companion for this deck, even though it is a companion in the deck. It has lifelink, and during each of your turns, you may cast one permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. Now, the main reason that's going to be important is because we do have quite a few creatures with mana value 2 or less, and the most important one for this is going to be Adric Mathematical Genius, which is 1 and a blue, so 2 mana value, for a 1/1 Human Artificer. We can pay 2 and a blue and tap him to copy target activated or triggered ability you control and choose new targets for the copy, but the most important ability he's got when compared with Lurrus is Ultimate Sacrifice, being able to pay 1 and a blue and sacrifice Adric to counter target activated or triggered ability. Then, of course, he's also got Doctor's Companion, but that's not super relevant for us. Now, because Adric can sacrifice himself to counter an ability, that means we can then recast him from the graveyard with Lurrus and keep that ability on the battlefield. That essentially prevents our opponents from ultimating a Planeswalker because we can just counter it. It prevents our opponents from activating some big, maybe win the game ability on their creatures or a triggered ability they get from doing damage. It can prevent enter the battlefield effects. It has a lot of uses that I think tend to get overlooked because it is just a one-time effect. But with Lurrus being able to make it a multiple time effect, we can really take advantage of it in ways that our opponents might not expect and honestly might just kind of irritate them, so that is something to be aware of. But That is cool interaction number 1. Moving on to cool interaction number 2, we're going to talk about Piper Wright Public Reporter and Martha Jones. So we've talked a little bit about some cards that can create clues in the past, but these are going to be 2 of the main clue payoffs for this deck, because Piper is 1 in a blue for a 1/2 legendary creature human detective. Whenever Piper deals combat damage to a player, investigate that many times. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then, we're going to pair her up with Martha Jones, which is 2 in a blue for a 3/2 human cleric. She has Woman Who Walked the Earth. When Martha Jones enters the battlefield, investigate. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, Martha Jones and up to 1 other target creature can't be blocked this turn. So you can kind of see how these 2 work well together in the sense that they both care about clues, but they're also protecting each other at the same time, because Piper is going to be able to attack with Martha Jones, having sacrificed a clue that Martha Jones created, so Piper can't be blocked. Martha can't be blocked, they're both getting in for damage, and because we sacrificed a clue, we're putting a +1/+1 counter on something, probably Piper, and then when Piper deals damage, we make more clues, so next turn we can sacrifice another clue, make them unblockable again, put more counters on them, make more clues, do more damage, and just slowly kind of snowball out of control, just constantly drawing cards, constantly putting counters on things, constantly making things unblockable, until eventually our opponents are going to have to deal with it. And honestly, if they spend a premium removal spell on our 2 or 3 drops, we're not super concerned about that, because by the time that they notice this is going to be a problem, we've probably already generated enough value to kind of replace these 2 cards as we're going about the game. So I think this is a super cool interaction. I don't know if it's anything that is super game breaking, but it's at least fun and a great way to keep the game progressing. Now, with all of that being said, we're going to move on from our cool interactions to the final portion of this deck tech, where we're going to talk about the budget of the deck. And this week, our budget came in at $33.69, so it's pretty significantly under our budget limit of $100. And that's mostly because, unfortunately, a lot of the companions are not super expensive. Although I say unfortunately, that is a good thing. It just means that they've been able to get out into the world. There is one major exception, though, in the deck, and that card is Rose Noble, which is $8.24, meaning that if you were to cut Rose from the deck, you're looking at a $25 deck, which is a lot more manageable, even though it's still not super low, considering we've done sub-20 decks in the past. But the main reason that Rose is so expensive is because she's a Secret Lair exclusive. You couldn't pull her out of the Doctor Who Commander decks or out of the Doctor Who Collector boosters. You had to buy a Secret Lair to get her. And unfortunately for our deck, she is one of the best payoffs in the entire deck, because she is 3 in a blue for a 2/3 human. She has Ward 2, so she's protecting herself. Whenever you cast a Doctor spell or a creature spell with Doctor's Companion, draw a card, and of course she also has Doctor's Companion. So being able to draw a card whenever we cast a Doctor's Companion, which, if we're being perfectly honest, makes up the vast majority of our deck. I think that the Doctor Who companions make up about 2/3 of the total companions in the deck, even though they only make up 1/3 of the total companion types. But either way, Rose is a phenomenal card draw engine for the deck, so I would highly recommend keeping her in the deck if you can. But like I said, she is pretty expensive, so if you do need to trim her down, especially because she is a Secret Lair drop exclusive and you may not have her and may not want to go out and get her, I completely understand. Either way, I do think she's worth it if you can include her. Moving on, though, to the cards I would recommend putting into the deck, if you could, some out-of-budget upgrades. This is where I get to be perfectly honest and say I have no idea what cards you could put into this deck that would be out of budget. Now, obviously, I could suggest, hey, put in some shock lands and some fetch lands and improve the mana base, because this is a 5-color deck, but that just doesn't feel quite as fun, and it doesn't feel like something that is worth mentioning. However, if you know of any companions that I may have missed, please do let me know. I don't know a ton about some of the universes beyond that we've gotten, so if there are companions in other universes beyond that I missed, please let me know. And if there's companions that are in Magic itself that I somehow missed, I would love to know that as well. I am not a perfect font of knowledge for all of this stuff, so please correct me if you see something that I've missed. On the other hand, though, as we move into the next piece of this, before we get to the game where we got to show off the deck, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. So as always, you can just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. However, if you're looking to go above and beyond, you do get some great benefits from joining our Patreon or the channel right here as a channel member on YouTube, because you get things like the deck lists a week early, you get access to the unedited gameplay videos, you get the guarantee from me that any cards you suggest for the channel will be turned into decks eventually. I will, of course, try to get to all of them, so if you have suggestions, please put them in the comments, but I can't guarantee to get to them the same way I can for our patrons and channel members. And then, of course, you also get access to a Discord where we brew up a lot of the decks and also where we play the games. So if you've ever wanted to be in a game on this channel, that is a great way to do it. Now, before we move on, I do, of course, have to shout out our current patrons and channel members. So a huge thank you goes out to William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Hui, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Tyler Esme, Sven Van Nimwegen, Patty Wack, Devin Purser, Brian Haney, Keegan Tawney, and Elias Mesa. So to all of you, thank you all so much for all of your support, and if you would like your name to be included among those awesome people, check us out on Patreon or on our YouTube channel right here as a channel member. Now, with all of that being said, let's move on to the game and see how this deck actually functions. So this week, we are joined by 3 opponents. We have Ghoul Caller Gisa being played by Luke, Morska Undersea Sleuth being played by Jason, and Sir Gwyn Hero of Ashvale being played by Doodle. So starting off with Ghoul Caller Gisa, this is pretty much just a zombie deck. Luke went pretty hard in making zombies that could then pump other zombies, so you've got the zombie lords, things that make tokens, and I do think he's very heavily focused on the actual token synergies because Ghoul Caller Gisa is able to sacrifice a zombie to make zombie tokens, so I think that that is a big part of his strategy here. I personally have never played against a Ghoul Caller Gisa deck, so I'm not 100% sure what to expect, but I do imagine it's going to be a ton of zombies, and that I'm not super prepared for with this deck because we are all creatures, and I imagine that they might be able to outrun us. Moving on to our next opponent, we have Morska being played by Jason. This is a full-on clue deck. It is about 90% the precon that came with Morska. He's changed a couple of cards here and there. I do genuinely believe he's changed like 10 or less cards because he wanted to keep it true to the original form. But Jason is definitely a person who loves value, so being able to make a ton of clues and tokens and draw cards is right where he wants to be. And I think that out of all the decks at the table, this is probably the one that I'm the most concerned about because the clue synergies that they've been creating lately are incredibly powerful. Morska is an incredibly powerful commander that just gets bigger and provides a ton of value. So I do think that there are going to be ways that Jason outpaces us, and I'm kind of hoping that we can use the zombies and the Sir Gwyn deck to put a little bit of pressure on Jason so we can kind of sneak in and steal the victory. And then, of course, that brings us to our final opponent, which is Doodle playing Sir Gwyn, and this is Doodle's Blood Token deck, and it's specifically built around a handful of enchantments that turn his artifact tokens and artifact, well, essentially non-creature, non-equipment artifacts, turns them into artifacts that are able to be equipped to his creatures, because then he's able to equip them with Sir Gwyn for free and essentially kind of get out of hand. So, for example, there are cards like Bludgeon Brawl that allow you to equip artifacts to creatures, and then they give +X+O, where X is the mana value of the artifact, so he can equip them for free with Sir Gwyn and just make a ton of damage. And he really has a lot of synergies that focus around bloods and then also around equipment. So it's a very unique deck. I know it's shown up a couple of times on the channel, but it's definitely one of my favorite decks that Doodle plays because it is, like I said, very unique. I think it's very cool to see the blood synergies and the equipment synergies. I'm not 100% sure how we're going to match up against it. I don't know how we do against Voltron, but I guess we're going to find out. So let me know down in the comments your predictions for this game. Let me know who you think is going to walk out the winner. And then, of course, let me know if there's any cards you would like to see me build around in the future. But with all of that being said, let's jump into this game, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Luke goes first, followed by Jason, Doodle, and then myself. On Luke's first turn, he plays a Swamp. Jason plays a Path of Ancestry. Doodle plays a tapped Blood Crypt. I play a Selesnya Guildgate. Luke plays a Swamp. Jason plays an island and casts Azorius Signet. Doodle plays an Ancient Tomb, taking 2 damage whenever he taps it for mana, then casts Inspiring Statuary, giving his non-artifact spells Improvise. I play an Exotic Orchard and cast Barbara Wright, giving all my sagas read ahead. Luke plays a Swamp and casts Haunted Bone Brute, giving me 2 1/1 dog tokens when it enters the battlefield. Jason casts his commander Morska, Undersea Sleuth, giving him no maximum hand size, letting him investigate in his upkeep, and putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Morska whenever he draws his second card each turn. He then plays a Temple of Mystery, scrying 1. Doodle plays a Swamp and casts Pointed Discussion, drawing 2 cards, losing 2 life, and making a blood token. I play a Swamp and attack Doodle for 2 with my dog tokens, then in my second main phase, I cast Lurrus of the Dream Den, letting me cast a permanent with mana value 2 or less from my graveyard once per turn. Luke plays a Swamp and casts Champion of the Perished, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever another zombie enters under his control. He then casts Lord of the Accursed, putting a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Perished, then also giving his other zombies +1/+1. He moves to combat, attacking Jason for 6 with the Hunted Bone Brute. In Jason's upkeep, he investigates, creating a clue token, then casts Teferi's Ageless Insight, letting him draw 2 cards whenever he would draw a card except for the first one he draws in each of his draw steps. He then plays a Krosan Verge, and at the end of turn, Doodle casts Valakut Awakening, putting 3 cards from his hand on the bottom of his library, then drawing that many +1. On Doodle's turn, he casts a Demonic Tutor, searching his library for a card and putting it into his hand. He then plays a Command Tower and casts Exsanguinator Cavalry, so whenever a knight he controls deals combat damage to an opponent, he puts a +1/+1 counter on it and makes a blood token. He then also casts Voldaren Bloodcaster, letting him make a blood token whenever a non-token creature he controls dies, and transforming the Bloodcaster when he controls 5 or more blood tokens. On my turn, I play a Maze's End and cast K9 Mark I, which can tap to make target legendary creature unblockable this turn, and also gives other legendary creatures Ward 1 as long as it's untapped. I then move to combat, attacking Doodle for 1 with Barbara, but he blocks with Exsanguinator Cavalry, gaining 2 life. Luke casts Swiftfoot Boots and attacks Doodle for 6 with the Bone Brute. Then, in his second main phase, Luke equips the Lord of the Accursed with the Swiftfoot Boots, giving it haste and hexproof. In Jason's upkeep, he investigates, creating a clue token, then plays an island and casts Piper Wright Public Reporter, letting him put a +1/+1 counter on target creature when he sacrifices a clue, and also creates a number of clues equal to the combat damage Piper does to an opponent. He then sacrifices a clue, drawing 2 cards, putting a +1/+1 counter on Piper, and putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Morska. After that, he casts Ongoing Investigation, letting him investigate whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to an opponent, and letting him pay 2 mana and exile a creature from his graveyard to investigate and gain 2 life. He moves to combat, attacking me for 4 with Morska, but I block with K9, killing it and taking no damage. Doodle plays a mountain and casts Odric Bloodcursed, letting him create a number of blood tokens equal to the number of keywords among creatures he controls, so he makes 3 blood tokens. He then attacks Jason for 2 with Exsanguinator Cavalry, gaining 2 life, putting a +1/+1 counter on it and making a blood token when it deals damage. On my turn, I play an island and recast K9 from my graveyard. Then I also cast Dan Lewis, making my non-creature, non-equipment artifacts into equipment. On Luke's turn, he cast Fleshbag Marauder, making each player sacrifice a creature, killing itself, Morska, Voldaren Bloodcaster, and Dan Lewis, while also putting a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Perished and letting Doodle make a blood. Jason plays an Adakar Wastes and casts Benny Brack's Zoologist, letting him draw a card in each end step if he created a token that turn. He then also casts Duggan, Private Detective, investigating when he enters the battlefield or attacks, and he has power and toughness equal to the number of cards in Jason's hand. Then at the end of turn, Jason draws 2 cards since he created a token this turn, and also at the end of turn, Doodle sacrifices 3 blood tokens, discarding 3 cards and drawing 3 cards. Then on Doodle's turn, he plays a Plains and casts Sun Titan, returning target permanent with mana value 3 or less from his graveyard to the battlefield whenever it enters or attacks. With this trigger, he returns Glasscast Heart, letting him make a blood token whenever 1 or more vampires he controls attacks, and it can also be activated, letting him pay a life to make a 1/1 vampire token with lifelink, or he can sacrifice the heart and 13 blood tokens to make each opponent lose 13 life while he gains 13 life. On my turn, I play a mountain that looks suspiciously like a thriving bluff because I've recently moved and don't know where my basic land box is. Then I recast Dan Lewis from my graveyard and activate Maze's End, returning it to my hand and searching my library for a gate, specifically Gond Gate, putting it into play and letting my gates enter the battlefield untapped. On Luke's turn, he cast Mirkwood Bats, making each of his opponents lose a life whenever a token enters or leaves his battlefield. Jason moves straight to combat, attacking Luke for 6 with Duggan and me for 2 with Piper, making a clue when he attacks. I block Piper with Barbara Wright, but before damage, Jason sacrifices a clue, putting a counter on Piper and killing Barbara while Luke takes 8. Then, in his second main phase, Jason plays an island and casts Inspiring Statuary, giving his non-artifact spells Improvise. He also recast his commander Morska, and at the end of turn, Doodle casts Chaos Warp, shuffling Jason's Teferi's Ageless Insight into his library and letting him reveal the top card of his library, putting it into play if it's a permanent. Unfortunately for Jason, he doesn't reveal a permanent, so it just stays on the top of his library. However, as he moves to end step, he does get to draw a card with Benny Brax, and still at the end of turn, Doodle activates Glasscast Heart, paying a life to make a vampire token. On Doodle's turn, he attacks me for 3 with the Cavalry and Jason for 6 with Sun Titan, returning Knight of the White Orchid from his graveyard to the battlefield, letting him search his library for a Savai Triome and putting it into play. Then Jason takes 6 and I take 3, letting Doodle put a +1/+1 counter on the Cavalry and make a blood token. In his second main phase, Doodle casts his commander, Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale, letting him equip his knights for 0 and letting him draw a card and lose a life when he attacks with an equipped creature. On my turn, I replay Maze's End and cast my commander, Jegantha the Wellspring. On Luke's turn, he cast Hoarding Broodlord, searching his library for a card, exiling it face down, and being able to play it for as long as it remains exiled, also giving spells he cast from exile Convoke. In Jason's upkeep, he investigates, then he taps Duggan, doing damage equal to twice his power to Doodle's Sun Titan, killing it. He also cast Hydroid Crassus for X equals 8, entering with 8 +1/+1 counters, gaining 4 life, and drawing 4 cards. This also triggers Morska, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Finally, at the end of turn, Jason draws a card with Benny Brax, and also at the end of turn, Doodle sacrifices a blood token to discard a card and draw a card, while also activating Glasscast Heart, paying a life to create another vampire token. On Doodle's turn, he cast Gamble, searching his library for a card and then discarding a card at random, discarding the card that he tutored for in Arterial Alchemy. He then sacrifices 4 blood tokens, discarding 4 more cards and drawing 4 more cards, before casting Bludgeon Brawl, turning all non-creature, non-equipment artifacts into equipments that give +X+O, where X is their mana value. Thanks to Sir Gwyn, he's able to equip the Glasscast Heart and Inspiring Statuary both to Exsanguinator Cavalry for free, giving it +6+O. This lets him attack Luke with the Cavalry for 10, drawing a card and losing a life on attacks, while also putting a +1/+1 counter on it and making 2 blood tokens when it deals combat damage. In his second main phase, Doodle re-equips the Glasscast Heart and Inspiring Statuary to the Knight of the White Orchid, giving it +6+O. He then plays a Plains and equips Odric and Sir Gwyn, both with a blood token, giving them +0/+0. On my turn, I activate K9, making Jegantha unblockable this turn, letting me attack Doodle for 5. Then in my second main phase, I activate Maze's End, searching my library for Basilisk Gate, putting it into play, and then replaying the Maze's End. Finally, I recast Barbara Wright from my graveyard, and pass. On Luke's turn, he cast Thran Dynamo from exile, then cast his commander Ghoul Caller Gisa, immediately equipping her with the Swiftfoot Boots, giving her hexproof and haste. In Jason's upkeep, he creates a clue token, then plays a Prairie Stream, and attacks me for 12 with Duggan, and attacks Doodle for 8 with Hydroid Crassus, investigating on the attack. I block with Dan Lewis, killing him but taking no damage, while Doodle takes 8. Then in Jason's second main phase, he cast Fumigate, destroying all creatures and gaining a life for each creature destroyed this way. In response though, he also cast Disorder in the Court, exiling Morska, Benny Brax, Hydroid Crassus, Piper, and Duggan, returning them to play at the end of turn and investigating 5 times. Then, the board wipe resolves, with 18 creatures dying, so Jason gains 18 life, and at the end of turn, all of his creatures return to play, letting him make a clue, while the Crassus immediately dies since it returns with no counters. Not to be outdone, on Doodle's turn he cast Farewell, exiling all creatures, artifacts, and graveyards. Once that resolves, he casts Transmutation Font, which can tap to make a clue, blood, or food, and then he immediately taps it to make a clue token, and sacrifices the clue to draw a card. He then plays a Sulphurous Mire, and passes. On my turn, I cast Visler Turlo, which enters under Jason's control, is goaded for the rest of the game, and in his end step, he draws a card and loses life equal to the number of cards in his hand. I then also activate Maze's End, searching my library for Baldur's Gate, putting it into play and returning Maze's End to my hand before replaying it. Luke plays a Swamp and casts Noxious Ghoul, giving all non-zombie creatures -1/-1 until the end of turn, whenever it or another zombie enters the battlefield. Jason attacks Doodle for 2 with Visler, investigating when it deals damage. Then in his second main phase, he casts Aerial Extortionist, exiling Visler Turlo and letting me cast it from exile, but also letting Jason draw a card whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand. He also casts Idol of Oblivion, which can tap to let him draw a card if he's created a token this turn, which he has, so he immediately taps it to draw a card. Finally, he plays a Forest and passes. Doodle activates Transmutation Font to make a food token, then recast his commander Sir Gwyn, letting Jason draw a card. He sacrifices his new food token to gain 3 life, and equips Sir Gwyn with Transmutation Font, giving her +5/+0. Then he plays a Swamp and passes. On my turn, I play a Cliff Gate, naming green so that it taps for both red and green. I also activate Maze's End, searching my library for a Heap Gate, putting it into play and returning Maze's End to my hand. After that, I cast Donna Noble, which has Soul Bond, and when Soul Bonded to a creature, they both do damage to target opponent equal to the damage they would take. Then I recast Visler, again giving control of it to Jason, letting him draw a card with Aerial Extortionist and not Soul Bonding it to Donna, since they can only be Soul Bonded for as long as I control both creatures. On Luke's turn, he plays a swamp and recasts his commander, Ghoulcaller Gisa, letting Jason draw another card. On Jason's turn, he plays a forest and attacks me for 4 with the Extortionist and Doodle for 2 with Whistler. When they deal damage, Jason creates 2 clue tokens and once again exiles Whistler with the Extortionist. In his second main phase, he casts Armed with Proof, investigating twice, then makes his clues into equipment that give +2/+0 and equip for 2. He also casts Thought Monitor, drawing 2 cards when it enters, and casts Junk Winder, letting him tap a creature and prevent it from untapping on its controller's next untap step whenever a token enters under his control. After that resolves, he casts Ethereal Investigator, investigating 3 times since he has 3 opponents, and creating a 1/1 spirit token whenever he draws his second card each turn. This also triggers the Junk Winder, tapping Gisa, Sir Gwyn, and Donna. Finally, he taps the Idol of Oblivion to draw another card. On Doodle's turn, he taps Transmutation Font to make a clue token, and sacrifices it to draw a card. After that, he casts Akiri, Fearless Voyager, letting him draw a card when he attacks a player with 1 or more equipped creatures. He also casts Falconwrath Celebrants, making 2 blood tokens when it enters, then equips Akiri and the Celebrants both with a blood token, giving them +0/+0. On my turn, I play Amaze's End and cast Romana II, which can tap to create a tap token that's a copy of target token that entered the battlefield this turn, and I soulbond her to Donna when she enters. I also pay 3 to put Umori the Collector into my hand from the Companion Zone, then cast it, naming creature, so all my creatures cost 1 less to cast. On Luke's turn, he cast a Knight's Whisper, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life. He also cast Feed the Swarm, destroying Junk Winder and losing 7 life since its mana value is 7. After that, he cast Death Baron, giving all his zombies and skeletons +1/+1 in Death Touch, also triggering the Noxious Ghoul and giving all non-zombies -1/-1 until the end of turn. Jason plays an Exotic Orchard and casts Nettle Cyst, creating a Phyrexian Germ token, equipping it to it, and giving it +X/+X, where X is the number of enchantments and artifacts he controls, which is currently 13. After that, he casts Merchant of Truth, investigating when a non-token creature he controls dies, and giving all of his clues Exalted. He re-equips the Nettle Cyst to Aerial Extortionist, giving it +13/+13 and killing the Germ, but this does let him attack Luke for 25 total damage, knocking him out of the game and also investigating and exiling Umori when the Aerial Extortionist deals combat damage. In his second main phase, Jason activates Idol of Oblivion to draw a card and make a spirit token. On Doodle's turn, he casts Shilgengar, Sire of Famine, letting him sacrifice a creature to make a blood token, and sacrifice 6 blood tokens to return all creatures from his graveyard to the battlefield. He activates Transmutation Font to create a food token, and immediately sacrifices it to gain 3 life. He then attacks Jason with Sir Gwyn for 10, drawing 2 cards and losing a life on attacks. Jason blocks with his Thought Monitor and Spirit token, killing them both and only taking 4 from the trample damage. Doodle then re-equips a blood token to Shilgengar and casts Blasphemous Act, doing 13 damage to all creatures, killing everything except the Aerial Extortionist. Notably though, since Donna and Romana are soul bonded, they both take 13 damage and allow me to do 13 damage twice to any of my opponents, doing 26 damage to Jason. On my turn, I activate Maze's End, searching my library for a Gateway Plaza, putting it into play, and then replaying Maze's End. I also cast Bear's Companion, making a 4/4 bear token when it enters. Finally, I cast Ace, Fearless Rebel, letting me sacrifice an artifact whenever she attacks to put a +1/+1 counter on her and fight target creature. Jason casts Kappa Cannoneer, which gets a +1/+1 counter and is unblockable until the end of turn whenever an artifact enters under his control, which does include itself. He also casts Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh, making the first activated ability of an artifact he activates each turn cost 2 less to activate. He immediately activates Tezzeret's +1 ability to draw a card, then discard an artifact, and then moves to combat, attacking me for 17 with Aerial Extortionist, investigating, putting a counter on the Kappa, and exiling Shilgengar when it deals damage. On Doodle's turn, he recasts Shilgengar, drawing Jason a card, and equips all 4 of his blood tokens to Shilgengar, giving him a grand total of +0/+0. He then activates Transmutation Font, making another blood token, and at the end of turn, Jason sacrifices a clue to draw a card. On my turn, I activate Maze's End, searching my library for a Gruul Guildgate, putting it into play and returning Maze's End to my hand, then replaying it. I activate Basilisk Gate, giving Ace +8/+8 until the end of turn, since I control 8 gates. This lets me then recast Umori, naming creatures, letting Jason draw a card, and cast Graham O'Brien, making a food token whenever I cast a spell from anywhere other than my hand. I also recast Visler Turlo, letting him enter under Doodle's control, making me a food and drawing Jason another card. After that, I move to combat, attacking Jason with all 3 of my creatures, sacrificing the food token with Ace on attacks to put a +1/+1 counter on her, but since I can't pay for Ward, I choose not to have her fight the Kappa. Jason then blocks the bear token, killing it, taking 13 and going to only 2 life. In my second main phase, I cast Amy Pond, and at the end of turn, Jason sacrifices another clue to draw a card, and then exiles 3 creatures from his graveyard with ongoing investigation to gain 6 life and investigate 3 times. In response, now that Jason is mostly tapped down, Doodle casts Vampiric Tutor, searching his library for a card, putting it on top of his library and losing 2 life. He then sacrifices a blood token to draw a card and discard a card, and then he can cast the card he tutored for to Fairy's Protection, phasing out all of his permanents, giving him protection from everything, and preventing his life total from changing. On Jason's turn, he evokes a Wave Sifter, investigating twice when it enters, putting 2 more counters on Kappa Cannoneer, then sacrificing the Wave Sifter when it enters. He re-equips the Nettle Cyst to the Kappa, giving it +21/+21, which is more than enough to be able to attack me with it and knock me out of the game, but also investigating when it deals damage, putting yet another counter on the Kappa. In his second main phase, Jason activates Idol of Oblivion to draw a card, and casts Lannis Cryptozoologist, letting him investigate whenever another non-token creature enters under his control. Then he activates Tezzeret's +1 ability, drawing a card and discarding an artifact. In Doodle's untap step, everything he controls phases back in, then he sacrifices 6 blood tokens to discard 6 cards and draw 6 cards. He equips Transmutation Font to Shilgengar, giving it +5/+0 and allowing Doodle to attack Jason for 11, but he's able to block with Aerial Extortionist, killing it and taking no damage. In his second main phase, Doodle plays a Bloodstained Mire, sacrificing it and losing a life to search his library for a Godless Shrine, putting it into play tapped. However, this doesn't stop Jason from untapping on his turn and just attacking Doodle with his massive Kappa Cannoneer, knocking him out and winning Jason the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a lot more going on there than I thought. I think that our deck actually proved to do pretty well. We had quite a few synergies going on, and I think a lot of what made our deck tick in ways that I wasn't expecting was our gate mana base, being able to slowly work toward the Maze's End victory while just constantly putting more bodies into play and just protecting ourselves, using Luris to recast our blockers, and things like that really made the deck feel like it had a chance the whole time, especially once we started getting some of the utility gates that could pump up our creatures or make a bunch of mana or help our gates come into play untapped. So I think that the mana base, despite the fact that it is still a budget mana base, worked very well with the deck, and it made it feel a lot more competitive than I expected it to be, especially considering it was only about a $30 deck. Otherwise, our opponents, Doodle's deck did very, very well throughout the course of the game. He definitely looked like a threat in the early going, being able to make a ton of blood tokens and do a ton of damage and start kind of just really making himself a threat. There were a couple of times where he was able to turn his artifacts into equipment, but he couldn't find a lot of his payoffs for that, so he really struggled a bit there. I think that if he'd been able to get Shilgengar into play just a turn earlier, he probably could have reanimated his entire graveyard, and I'm not 100% sure if that would have done much, but it at least would have made things a lot more interesting. Moving around the table to Luke, he got a little bit stuck on mana, unfortunately, so he didn't get to do everything that he wanted to do, and the zombie deck really doesn't want to be playing just a single creature every single turn, so he really fell behind in the early game, and then once he started to catch up, Jason realized that he was going to become a threat, and so he kind of just knocked him out when he was given the chance. So we didn't get to see too much from the Gisa deck, so hopefully we get to see it again in the future. And then finally, of course, we have Jason, our winner. There is a bit of a running joke on the channel and in our Discord that Jason is nearly unbeatable when he sits down to play with a precon. I genuinely don't remember the last time that I have beaten Jason when he's been playing a pre-constructed deck. So I don't know if that just means he's the best Magic player out of all of us or what. But I think that the fact that this was mostly a precon played into that. Of course, he's at like 95% of his power, which is pretty good, all things considered. But like I said, when we were talking about the decks initially, that deck full of clue synergies was incredibly powerful. It really felt like he never ran out of value. He never ran out of card draw. Every single card in the deck synergized together. It really just overwhelmed the rest of the table, even when it got to the point where it was very clearly a 3v1 game and we were all still losing to Jason. Very, very impressive showing by the Morska deck, and a huge congratulations on the victory. But all of the rambling aside, I had a ton of fun with this deck. This is the kind of janky nonsense I love putting together. So if you have any suggestions for cards that could go in this deck, something that I missed, please do let me know. And of course, if you have suggestions for future cards that you would like to see on this channel turned into decks, please do let me know that as well. I'm always looking for new cards to brew around. So thank you all so much for watching this. Thank you for watching the deck tech and the game. If you enjoyed it, please do like the video and subscribe, and also double check to make sure you are actually subscribed, because sometimes it seems like you are, but you're actually not. So please do double check that for me. Otherwise, thank you once again, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.